Welcome back to another episode of the Braun Performance and Rehab Podcast. Joining me today is Luka Svilar. Luka and I are going to be diving into his work as an author and the books that he wrote in the space of basketball performance, in addition to reviewing concepts relating to periodization for basketball athletes and long-term programming design for basketball in particular. So this is a really great chat and a really great episode overall. I learned a lot from Luka, and I really appreciated his time and our conversation as a whole, and I know that you're going to love it as well. This episode and every episode in Season 5 is made possible by Isophit. Isophit is our go-to for all things relating to isometric strength training and can help you and your athletes win more and hurt less. For more on Isophit, you can check the description below. Enjoy. Luka, welcome to the podcast. I'm super excited to work with you today, man. Thank you so much for being here. I appreciate your time.
Thank you. Thank you for the invitation. It's always a pleasure to catch up with people from the field, and hopefully I can share a little bit of knowledge. I will be focused more on sharing knowledge than my background, because that's not so important for the others. But okay, let's see.
It's funny you say that though, Luka, because I feel like you're a pretty interesting guy from everything I've heard about you, seen about you, and everything that Brad has told me about you that way. I know you know our mutual friend Brad Thorpe quite well. But for people who maybe haven't heard that stuff about you and all the amazing things that you do in the basketball world, could you at least give them a little rundown about who you are and what you're doing?
Okay, we can definitely spend 30 seconds. I will keep it short. Last 10 to 15 years, I've been in the field of basketball. That's my childhood love, and I kind of decided to chase my career in basketball, strength and conditioning. So I'm strength and conditioning coach or physical performance coach, however you want to call it. And by my educational background, I'm master in kinesiology. I did my PhD in Spain, and last 2 years I've been enrolled in a postgraduate studies in sports and rehabilitation medicine, and I have one exam left to finish. So I think by September I'm gonna also have that diploma in my pocket, in my resume. So this is where I see myself in basketball field in the next also 10 to 15 years at least. I don't know what's going to happen in 25 years, 30 years from now, but next decade, I definitely want to stay in the field of basketball. I'm an author and editor of 3 books related to basketball strength and conditioning. So this is another hobby that I have beside coaching. And obviously from time to time I do lecturing, but my main job and main responsibility is to be a coach.
Yeah, so you do a little bit of everything, Luka. You didn't mention anything about sleep in there. How do you balance all that, my guy? That's amazing. And you're right. You mentioned the authorship side of things there. And I know that you just released a new book called There's More Than One Way to Skin a Cat, I believe. And that book's really been interesting to me because normally when people write books, it's all about their approach, their philosophy, their way of doing things. But from what I remember reading and understanding, you took a very different approach to writing a book about strength and conditioning and performance development for basketball, I believe.
Yeah, that's basically the aim. The goal of the book was to bring more people on one project. The Essentials of Physical Performance in Elite Basketball. That's the name of the big book that I have, almost 400 pages. Very detailed, 12 different chapters, from communication to training, like strength training, agility training, conditioning, load monitoring, periodization, recovery. All those chapters are there. And it's more like a textbook. Everything is referenced by the scientific research, good scientific research, mainly from basketball. And I have never used a word textbook behind it, but then when I started to get more feedback from the Americans who read it, they always refer to it as a textbook, So I think it's very good for all the experienced coaches because they can have some reference values and some data that is scientifically proven in one book. And it's also very useful for younger coaches, students who want to get into the field and understand all those drawers that we have in our table as strength and conditioning coaches, if that makes sense. But then I came up with this idea to bring more people on one project, because I realized here in Europe, we also organized, I'm one of the co-founding members of the Association of Strength and Conditioning Coaches in EuroLeague basketball. And then every year when we organize summit, there is a debate how we're going to organize topics. And then there are always many coaches who will present similar topic. Let's say we give them freedom to choose, and then for some reason 3 coaches say, hey, I want to talk about testing. Hey, I want to talk about strength in the preseason. And then some of my colleagues would be like, who are co-organizing the event, they would be like, maybe it's not so smart that we have such similar topics or the same topics. And I would always be like, hey, let's just give them freedom to talk, because even though the name of the topic is the same, it always ends up being so different. And I love to see the difference between coaches, and actually being aware of the differences moves my brain even more compared to when I listen only to one lecture of, let's say, preseason strength. When I'm able to listen two different speakers in the same day, it just activates my brain in a different way, And then those kind of experiences, and obviously I'm in love with writing and leaving something to fellow strength coaches, younger or experienced. I realized that I can use basically the same type of content regarding the name of the chapters as I did in the essentials, covering many different fields. As I said, communication, strength training, recovery, and so on and so forth. I made slight adjustments. For example, traveling is a topic in the Skin the Cat book. Injury management is also a big topic. And then I wrote around 8 questions per chapter, very broad type of questions that each coach had to answer. So we have one question, 10 different answers. And basically what my goal was, to anyone who reads the book can actually, when they read the question, they can either first answer by themselves and then read all the answers, or if it's someone completely unexperienced, like student, he can read all the answers and he can take notes and kind of put in the notes what makes the most sense to them. So it's a very engaging type of book. It can be a simple read for all the experienced coaches, like a summer read next to the pool. You can just go and see what's in the head of other experienced coaches. I wanted to bring together 2 different fields, 5 coaches from US, college and MBA, and 5 European experts. So we can have also different cultures behind working at the elite level of basketball. And then, as I said, it can be very engaging material for all coaches, not only young coaches, but also experienced. And so far, the feedback from coaches that read the book is good. And I'm very happy that we kind of succeeded in that. And I will use this opportunity to once again thank to all the other 9 strength and conditioning coaches that are co-authors on the book.
Yeah, no, that's incredible. And I think you broke that down really well. First off, I love your concept of the essentials, as you referenced it as a textbook, something that kind of dives in a little bit deeper to the same concepts from a scientific, research-backed standpoint, because I think it's important to have that kind of deeper understanding and knowledge of the concepts that go into physical performance for basketball. What are you doing? Why are you doing it? What effect do we find it have? Is it proving to be effective, or is it proving to be, hey, maybe this is a little bit of a outdated approach that way? But to your point, I think that couples and pairs so nicely with the More Than One Way to Skin a Cat book, because that book, as you mentioned, has the same question, posed to 10 different people, and they're going to answer it 10 different ways. And, they might use things a little bit different than you read about in the research. They might actually be ahead of the research continuum and timeline that way. I find a lot of times some of that research kind of lags behind about 6 to 12 months due to editing and publication and so on that way. So I really like that concept because I think sometimes strength coaches themselves can become ahead of the research continuum. And you're right, it gives us a new appreciation or a new lens to look through when it comes to the things that we're doing with our athletes that way. We might all use, take a squat, for example. We might all program a squat for our athletes, but we might all program that squat differently. Maybe someone does it in a VBT sense. Maybe someone else does it in a very heavy sense. Maybe someone else does it with a tempo focus, and maybe someone else, just does isometric squats, right? There's so many different ways to take this one thing and apply it across the spectrum, across the gamut of basketball performance. So I really like that pairing, and I like the coupling of the two together because I think they complement each other very well.
I agree, 100%.
So you talked a little bit about, how the content between the two books is very similar that way. But there's still obviously a difference between research backing versus more just interview with coaches that way. Is there any other key similarities or differences between the book, the structures that way, or anything like that?
I mean, when you get to read the book, I think it's just completely different. I think Skin the Cat, as it's kind of an interview, but it's not like I told coaches when you will be answering, just try to be also detailed in your answers. Don't think that you're just answering to a blog post. It has to be like very detailed type of answer with a lot of examples from the field and answering the why so that the reader can get as much as possible from it. But essentially, it is completely different type of book. It can be a very engaging read if you let your mind digest all the answers from the coaches, but it can also be a very simple read as you're just reading an answer to a question. While the essentials of physical performance in elite basketball, it's a very heavy book in that sense because, for example, in conditioning and strength and power chapters, the first part is related to physiology, to understanding the eccentric contractions, concentric contractions, and isometric, and why we need it. There is a lot of charts and tables on periodization and load monitoring. You can just open one page and look into two reports, let's say a monthly and weekly report or monthly and daily report, and you can just go through the numbers and try to compare it with your reports. I mean, it's very, very detailed book. So in that sense, they are completely two different types of books. The only thing that I used are the names of the chapters. So in that sense, it covers the whole picture of what strength and conditioning coach does normally on the team. But when you start to read the book, both books, it's just completely different type of read and thought process and everything.
Yeah, and there's so much knowledge and information packaged into those, and we could probably spend 10 hours talking today and not even begin to scratch the surface on what all is in there. I do want to say real quick, I really appreciate you bringing up on the isometric contraction side of things, because I feel like a lot of times we get so locked into concentric and eccentric with our movements that we often forget about the role of an isometric in there. So I love that you bring that up in your books that way. As far as the general topics go, I think one of the biggest pieces that a lot of coaches are still trying to sort out, and we even see this on the physical therapy side of things, is, we know we're going to have so much time with someone, whether that's, hey, we're going to have 6 months in season, or hey, we're going to have 3 months in the off season. How do we kind of break up that time to get the most bang for our buck? How do we, to use the word periodization, I believe that's kind of the trendy term now in strength and conditioning. How do we go about kind of taking the time that we have, breaking it down into blocks and saying, hey, we're going to work on this here, this here, this here, and then kind of put it all together, put all the pieces of of the puzzle together to have a beneficial outcome for the athlete that way. And it's interesting because I was talking with someone yesterday who's very against periodization. In fact, this individual was saying, "Hey, I don't periodize any of my programs. We just go." So to your point about there being more than one way to skin a cat, there's also more than one way to periodize a program. So when it comes to periodization for basketball, where does your mind go on that topic? Is that something that you're very for, very against? Why should we even consider breaking up a program into blocks like that?
This year, we had a privilege to invite Franz Bosch to the summit, and we know that Franz Bosch approach in strength and power training is very, very different from the traditional one. And what he also shared with us is that he does not truly believe in the general periodization strategies and models. So there are definitely, and he has success with his athletes. And also a long time ago, there were Olympic champions in track and field, weightlifting, and other sports who worked only through periodized models and periodized programs. So as you said, there is definitely different ways to achieve your goals. I belong to this traditional school, if I have to say it like that. I believe in periodization, but I mainly believe in periodization, first of all, because it gives me a clear mind on my goals and targets that I want to achieve. So I know once I put my plan in front of me, periodization starts with deciding like what I'm going to work on with my athletes. Is it strength? Is it power? Is it hypertrophy? Is it conditioning? Is it aerobic conditioning? Is it anaerobic conditioning? So I have to decide, and this is already basics of the planning and periodization, right? Then we know that physical readiness and shape fluctuates during the year. And if we want to somehow prepare our athletes, or our athlete, depends if we work with one player or a full team, we kind of want to maintain high level of performance throughout the year. But then when we talk about peak physical performance, we want to prime it during the most important events or periods of the season. Is it the start of the season so important? Is it the playoffs? Is it the finals? Is it in Europe the cup that is played in most of the countries in February? You know, so we have to know what are the most important periods of the year and somehow try to bring players from that, let's say, optimal window, because optimal window can also have ups and downs. And then we maybe want to go slightly up in physical performance, 3%, 5%, depends on what we are trying to measure. In that sense, vertical jump or shooting accuracy, you name it, just slightly up. And that would be the priming for the main event. Okay. Also, periodization for me should be there to a certain extent, because we will become more effective in what we are trying to achieve, and also efficient. Because yes, we can spend with our basketball players 10 hours in the weightlifting room per week. But can we achieve the same thing by being 5 or 6 hours in the weightlifting room? That means that we will spend less energy and we will recover faster, and we will probably be in a better readiness to play games. I'm talking about the in-season period. So I always want to have a little bit in my mind what I want to achieve and what should be certain periods for achieving it, because hypertrophy goals cannot be achieved in cycle of 2 to 4 weeks, but maybe a power focused period can last for 2 to 4 weeks before, let's say, we go and we play that cup tournament in February. Okay, so I'm just giving different examples. This is the main reason why I believe in periodization. Now, of course, periodization, especially if we talk about team sports, especially elite level of basketball where you have 2 to 4 games, at least 2 games a week, sometimes even 4, as it is in the NBA. Sometimes you play Monday, Wednesday, Friday, Sunday. In those situations, you have to be very, very flexible, because not all of the players play same amount of minutes. You have high loaders, you have low loaders, you have moderate loaders, you have traveling involved. In some periods of the year, more travels, in some periods, less travel. These are all factors that can impact physical readiness and physical performance. So in that sense, for example, during the off season, I want to know, do I have 2 months or 4 months period? Because it can completely change how I program. So this is basically periodization for me. Do I blindly follow and immediately make 4 months plan and there is no way to change it? Hell no. I'm always flexible to adapt, to change, to adjust, but at least I have a clear mind with goals and targets that I want to achieve in different cycles. Preseason in European elite basketball lasts for 4.5 weeks. I can already plan the preseason with many details, but we can also adjust and change. And then when it comes to in season, I like to plan, for example, at least a month ahead, because I know what comes very soon. Do we have a period with less games, or we have period with more games? Do we have a period with less travel or more travel, and so on and so forth? And these are the factors that I like to consider and have in my mind, and then I can prepare a general idea of how the program should look like. And then I periodize team practices. Obviously, games are already there if we talk about the in-season. So you start from, let's say, top down, because bottom up would be, no, we practice pop, 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 and then we put games. It's not a normal way to do it. So we go top down. We see, okay, here we have games. Here we travel. And then here we will practice. This is the general idea. It can change, but this is the general idea of team practices. Now we will put also when we're going to do the strength and power sessions. Do we microdose? Do we go traditional strength training, and so on and so forth? And also what I like to periodize is recovery. So we know on which days we can do different things. And it is especially important because on the road, you don't have access to maybe all of your resources for recovery, like cold plunges, sauna, you name it, especially this big equipment that you sometimes need. You don't always travel with, like, in the best hotels that always offer spa. Not all of the players want to go to hotel spa because of the other hotel guests and so on and so forth. So you can also periodize your recovery based on your travel and game schedule. Does that make sense?
It does. You broke that down so well, Luka. I really like that. And just to kind of run it back here and review a few things. First off, I really think of the concept of periodization as reverse engineering, right? So we're going to take a look at, the time period we have. Maybe it's a year, maybe it's shorter than that, maybe it's longer than that, but we're going to start backwards from whatever our end goal is and build a plan to get there. So you're right. Maybe our end goal is, hey, look, we're going to be in the finals, we're going to be in the cup, and we need to make sure we are at our best at that given point in time. So then it's how do we kind of build backwards from that end goal to get there? And we break that up into small blocks. And as you mentioned, every little block is going to have some kind of goal and intention behind it. And I think that's essential, because if you try to do too much at one given point, if you try to chase 10 different cats, to use the metaphor in relation to your book, you're not going to catch any of them at the end of the day. You just run around all over the place and you get nothing from it. So I think that being really intentional in the actions that you take in each little block is really important, and having those defined goals of, hey, this is what we're going to work on, this is what we're going to address, this is how it's going to help us in our end goal of peak health and peak performance when cup season rolls around. So I think that's important, and I like your concept of almost periodizing within periodization, if that makes sense. So, if you're looking at your given block of time of, say, 4 weeks for power development, you're also periodizing other pieces to that puzzle, like you mentioned, the recovery and that sort of thing as well. And as you mentioned, it has to be fluid in nature because the demands placed on the athlete change every week. And we cannot be too rigid in our structure and working with the athlete because we really don't know what they're going to present like on the day-to-day. They could wake up and have slept awful and they're just not ready to go. Likewise, we might have planned a real light session for them and they might wake up feeling amazing. And it's like, hey, we have to be able to adjust our plan based on how the athlete presents that day. And as you mentioned, there's hundreds, if not thousands of factors that can impact that. And I think that's where the art of coaching really comes in, is the ability to shift and adapt on the spot to how the athlete is presenting that day while still keeping the session or whatever work you do with them in relation to that goal for that period of time, that block, and then that block in relation to the bigger picture. I think that's a really, great way to look at it that way. And I think that it's something too that there's a lot of debate too on how we break up those blocks. Some people in the strength and conditioning world are doing a lot of timeline-based stuff. You mentioned 2 to 4 weeks, good for power development, not so good for hypertrophy. We might need more time, which I completely understand. But do we break up these blocks into timeline periods, predefined periods where it's like, hey, for 4 weeks, we're going to do this. For 6 weeks, we're going to do that. Or do we even, change our mindset a little bit and use something more like a criteria-based progression where it's like, hey, we're going to work on power. I don't care if it takes us 2 weeks or 6 weeks, but we're going to work on power until you hit these certain metrics from an objective standpoint. Then we'll move on to the next block. Where does the timeline versus criterion debate come into this world of periodization in your mind?
Oh, no, it's 100% true that the timeline and duration is just like so common. But what we already have in our mind, at least I have it, when I say a month, let's say for power, I immediately have in my mind that it's at least 2 to 3 sessions a week. Then someone can ask, yes, but what if you have opportunity to work only once a week? Then obviously it changes the whole perspective and duration of the cycle that is focused on developing power. But when I say the number of weeks, I already had in my mind. I know my circumstances, I know my environment, I know the number of games, the number of sessions, and so I know all the factors when I make that decision on the duration. But obviously, we can go a little bit more detailed, and we can, instead of talking about the period of weeks, we can say we need at least 10 to 15 sessions. Some weeks you will do 2 sessions, some weeks you will do 3 sessions, some weeks you will do 4 sessions. Depends on what you're trying to achieve. If you go hypertrophy, 4 sessions, probably you will need to introduce some kind of splits, because if you want to develop upper body hypertrophy and upper body strength, maybe killing your chests 4 times a week is not the smartest thing to do, right? So even though you might have a lot of time, let's say in the off season, you cannot do upper body hypertrophy every other day if you don't go into splits and you cut maybe a day with pulling motion to pressing and pushing and so on and so forth. Okay, so for me, you can always talk about the number of sessions that you need in order to achieve certain goal. And you can always, I would always go for the range. Let's say 10 to 15 sessions, or for hypertrophy, 25 to 30 sessions. And then after the half of the sessions, let's say 15, we will do first measurement and measure the body in whatever way, body fat, circumferences, you name it. And then we will say, okay, we made a progress of this much, hopefully, after the half of the program. Let's see now what's going to be the next target. Is it after 20 sessions or 25 sessions? If we say we need 30 sessions, first measurement point is after 15, And then the second is after 25. Maybe after 25, you will reach your goals. And as you say, you can just stop. You can talk to the athlete. You can ask the athlete, do you see yourself moving forward and improving a little bit more, slightly more? Do we need those 5 sessions more? Or you are also happy? I'm happy with the results. Are you happy with the results? If you are both on the same page, you can stop after 25 sessions. So this is basically a very live process, and we don't have to blindly follow the periods. However, because of traditional culture of training, some people, many athletes, I think, work in those cycles. Oh, how much time I need to work on this? I would never say, hey, within a month we are there. I would always give a range, and I know that it's an easy way to communicate with the athlete. So 4 to 6 weeks, it's a starting point of conversation. But if we go into more details, definitely the number of sessions that you will do is super important, and obviously feedback on the progress. Because after 10 sessions and you plan 15, after 10 sessions, you still don't have any improvement. Either you have to completely readjust your program, or you have to maybe devote way more time to achieve your goals.
I love how you mentioned the importance of having the conversation with the athlete and developing that rapport and relationship deeper, because at the end of the day, we're working for the athlete. So we have to make sure what we're doing, meets what they're trying to get out of our sessions. And I find a lot of times the better you can have that conversation with the athlete and connection there, the better results you're going to get. I don't know if there's any studies that show that correlation per se, but I think plain and simple, if you understand the athlete you're working with, you're able to better provide for them from a programming and overall strength and power and metric development standpoint that way. And it's interesting too, because I think sometimes, we, try to all make the perfect program for the athlete, but we find that there's certain things the athlete doesn't like to do. Maybe they don't like, back squat or front squat with a bar. Maybe they don't like deadlifting from the floor, whatever it is. And we have to be able to adjust our approach to meet the demands of the athlete and meet what they like to do and don't like to do accordingly in order to continue to progress forward. The other piece that I think is really essential that you brought up is that importance of having some sort of test at some point in your program and some point in your periodization block to say, hey, am I succeeding with this, or are we way off the mark? Because I do think sometimes there's a disconnect between what we hear from the athlete and what we're measuring on that testing side of things. I've had instances before where athletes tell me they feel awful, and then they test and they're, 20 to 30% improvement from last time. It's like, okay, where's the disconnect here? Why do they tell me they don't feel good, but they're testing way better? Or on the opposite side, this doesn't happen as often in my experience, but what if the athlete tells me they're feeling great and then their testing is awful? Or, are they still at where they were before? Did they even, regress in some areas? And that opens up a whole nother conversation about like, okay, what is my programming actually doing? Great that the athlete is getting, more confident and feels better, but why are we not seeing the metrics improve? Or on the flip side, hey, the metrics are improving, the program's doing its job. Why is the athlete not feeling these effects? And I think that the more we kind of work to blend or bridge the gap between that subjective component and the objective data side, the better off our program success is going to be. But if you're not testing and you're not having the conversations with the athletes, then you're never going to know. And your programming is never going to be able to improve because you're never taking, a step back to look at what you're doing and what effect it's having.
100%. I'm working now for the last year and a half as a personal physical performance coach, and I have privilege to work with one of the best players here in Europe. He's an American point guard, and he's a veteran. He's 31 years old, and he knows his body so well. And even though I would like to maybe test more, because I always ask myself, am I doing the right things? Am I really a coach? Am I testing enough? And often I get asked from the colleagues, like, what do you do now to test the player, to see his readiness, and so on and so forth. And then I tell them that even though I have more time than ever to test his physical performance abilities, um, jumping, strength, power, you name it, actually he knows his body so well, and he has experience of playing at the college level, super high level of college. Then he played for many years in the NBA. Now he plays in Europe for many years, and he knows how his body feels when it is at its prime. And he knows exactly when he's well conditioned. He knows well when he has the explosiveness, because his skill level is so high that he knows exactly when he runs up and down, when he needs to press full court someone, he immediately understands if he's well conditioned. And on the other side, when he goes for that cut and makes a jump shot or whatever explosive move that he needs to perform, he knows exactly when he does it if he has enough explosiveness in his legs. So the beauty of my job now is that we get to spend a lot of time together, because we also do a lot of things on the stretch table, and stretch table, as you know, is a time for many different conversations. Sometimes they are related to physical performance and game performance, well, more to the field. Sometimes it's just some other topics, real estate, cars, life, and so on and so forth. But you get to share so many details on what happened during practices and games with that one player that I actually question myself, do I really need to test him? Because as you said, and you gave a perfect example, sometimes you can also get very good scores because your scores are also related to something. You decided what is good and what is bad, but the good result in the test does not mean immediately that this player feels super ready. There is a big mental part to it, obviously, but for some reason, maybe player can show great level of explosiveness or even repeated explosiveness in 3 to 5 consecutive jumps. But then after 5 minutes of very intense basketball game, running up and down, and he was involved in a lot of contact that made him tired, he completely lost his endurance for that given quarter or half of the game. And then he can feel like shit. And he can come to me and he can tell me after the game, man, I felt like shit in the first half. And what can I say? Because he did. He felt like shit because he was just involved in some actions that he is normally not involved so often. We kind of didn't prepare for that. And it happens maybe once in 10 games, once in 15 games. And it can be caused by maybe some other factors, like he didn't sleep appropriately for 1 or 2 nights, and that the game was kind of shock to him, you know. So I always try to be very critical in my approaches. I always try to ask myself, do you test enough? Do you collect enough information? Are you really doing the right thing? And I think the more players know their bodies and how it works, the more chance you have to really know if you are doing the right thing. And from time to time, if you can give some objective data to it, that's great. But also, we have to be careful with interpretation of those objective data.
You're absolutely right. And I mean, there's so many amazing points that you just brought up there, Luka. I mean, First off, your players, as you mentioned, really have to know themselves. And if they don't know how to, kind of step back and become internally aware of what their body is trying to tell them, then we have to figure out a method or a framework that we can use to get that for them, because we can't feel what they feel when they do things. And that's valuable information that can inform our decision making and further help the player. So I certainly think having some kind of framework and methodology behind that is essential. And we just talked about that at length with Rob Wilson on the podcast there. The other piece you mentioned about the data side of things, and funny enough, in that same podcast we talked about that extensively, where currently in the world it's almost like data is the king. But in reality, is it data or is it context? Because the data becomes relevant to you as you're interpreting it. So I think that there's a whole separate conversation that could be had about establishing the right performance indicators and making sure you're looking at the right data, and even just making sure that your data is consistent, because you're right, people are going to test very different if you test them before the game versus after the game. We expect, certain factors like fatigue to play a role. So understanding what you're looking for, why you're looking for it, and the context of that metric in particular is really essential to actually having those long-term results and long-term gains. And the other piece we talked about earlier, you mentioned about the recovery periodization that way. I think that the other piece you can see from the data and subjective standpoint is there comes a point in the season where your athletes just start to feel a little bit tired or a little bit exhausted, or maybe they're just taking a beating on the court, on the playing pitch that way, and they're starting to physically develop some stuff. Hey, maybe we're getting some tendinopathy. Hey, the hip's getting a little cranky. Hey, we rolled our ankle. And I think that while periodization is often talked about for performance gain, sometimes it becomes a conversation of how can we maintain this level of performance and output, keep the player healthy in the game for a long period of time. Because at the end of the day, if they're not available when their number is called, it doesn't matter how high they can jump if they can't step foot on the court because they're injured. So for my college athletes in particular, a lot of them will come to me in season, and we kind of do more of a periodized maintenance approach, for lack of a better way to put it, where we have certain issues or certain things that popped up, and it's a matter of how can we keep you at the highest level of performance that we can for the longest period of time that we can. Instead of trying to improve it, it's more of like, hey, we need to maintain this in the presence of injury, if that makes sense.
I agree with you. I don't think that I have to add something to it, because that's the whole point. Availability with the highest level of performance that you can get at that given moment is definitely our main target. And I think we should not panic if there are game days and training days where players don't feel at their 100%. I just believe that we should somehow give our best of knowledge and experience in trying to keep players above 80% of their physical capacities, because everything below 80% can definitely have very negative impact on shooting accuracy, focusing on tactical decisions, and those kind of things. But if for me, that's the sweet spot zone during the season, 80 to 100%. Hopefully you can keep players 90 to 100%. That would be even better. Let's say green zone is 90 to 100%. Orange zone is 80 to 90. Okay, everything below 80%. And now you can use 5, 10 or different markers that will tell you what is 100%. Is 100% sleeping every day 8 to 9 hours? Well, when you sleep 6 or 7 hours, you drop by 20, 25%, whatever. Okay, is your marker, I don't know, CK levels in the body? Is your marker height of your jump? Is it peak power in isometric mid-thigh pull? You name it. But if you can maintain that your player is in that 90 to 100% zone, that's perfect. And then when that, let's say, cup comes in February or playoffs or whatever, if you can, during those periods, somehow achieve that player is very close to 100%, or in some cases, he can even improve some of the markers above 100%, that would be great, right?
Definitely agree with that. And like we just mentioned, it comes back to establishing the right metrics and the right markers. And you bring up such an interesting concept on the percentages that way, because that's a conversation we had with Matt and I not too long ago on the podcast as well, in relation to workload. And from a periodization standpoint, we have to understand, to develop some of these different things, whether it's hypertrophy, whether it's power, whatever physical attribute we are trying to improve, we have to push the athlete further. We have to progress them in order to get that stimulus. But there's been a lot of strength coaches and a lot of physios and a lot of smart people that are finding if we move forward too much too quickly, and the percentage I keep hearing thrown out is a 10 to 20% increase in workload in a given week or more from the previous week, bad things happen. So it's all a matter of how do we go about keeping that progression moving forward, but not moving forward too much too quick, because as you mentioned, the main thing is the sport of basketball. They have to be on the court in this case. And if we push them too hard in the weight room and we jump up, hey, we're going to do 40% more weight room volume this week compared to last week, and all of a sudden they're not able to play because we beat them up too much from a training standpoint, sure, maybe we develop their power a little bit better, but what does that matter if they can't play their sport at the end of the day? So really having a deeper understanding of those workloads. And again, kind of like how we started talking about this conversation, that's where resources like your textbook really come into play. So you have that depth of knowledge and depth of understanding on the programming side that you can leverage when it comes to putting these pieces into action.
Yeah, I can add, just as you mentioned, like load monitoring and understanding how you prepare. I can just drop one little idea. What I consider is pretty crucial when you decide on the progressions. 10 to 20% should not be a big risk, because it ends up in that work to like maybe like ratio from week to week, you will be at 1.1, 1.2 compared to the previous week. But the thing that we cannot consider when progressing is only the acute load from that given week. We have to look at the broader picture and have in our minds what's the chronic load for a player. And chronic load is represented through last 3 to 5 weeks normally in the scientific literature. So what we need to have in mind when we are trying to progress with the loads and add those 10 to 20%, but maybe not 40, 50%, because that's a big risk of acute overload. What we need to consider is what we have been trained for in the last 3 to 5 weeks. And then in order to improve loads in the following week, what is the 10 to 20% that could be safe zone compared to this chronic baseline? Because if in that chronic baseline, we already were kind of building something up let's say last 3 weeks, we started from something. 2 weeks ago, we tried to build on something. Week before, we also added load. Then 10 to 20% of extra load in this new week 4, can potentially be very harmful, because chronically, we have already built something and our body is not resilient enough to withstand that 10 to 20% more. So we have to know what is behind us in order to safely plan the following week. If your chronic last 3 weeks were more or less stable, then adding 10 to 20, even 25% should not be very harmful. So we always have to have in our mind what we have been chronically trained for, and according to the chronic baseline, we should plan the overload, underload, or the maintenance.
Yeah, I love that point. That's such a great point. Being able to look at the broader, bigger picture, and not just on the week to week, but actually stepping back and looking at the development of how we got to where we are that day. Luka, I feel like we covered a lot of ground as it relates to your books, your amazing work in the basketball space, and periodization and program design considerations for the sport of basketball. Is there anything that we missed or anything else you wanted to cover as we were chatting today?
I mean, I can.
We can go on all day.
Yes, yes. I mean, I'm very, very passionate about the field, and obviously, whatever I have experienced and whatever I have learned through books and experience in the field, and what I have learned from the others, I don't have any issues to share. So it's better for people who are hosting podcasts. I always say it's better that you ask questions, because if I start to talk, it's just like my big desire to share as much as I can. So if you have one or two questions more that you would like to touch, I'm here to answer it. It's your podcast, so I don't want to run the show and come up with extra stuff, because I have millions of ideas in my head. But yeah, if you want to touch one or two topics to close it up, that would be perfect.
No, I think just to kind of general recap and rundown, I think at the end of the day, you have to have that kind of general understanding of what you're doing with your athletes, why you're doing it. You have to have that general relationship with the athlete and have the ability to combine what they're telling you with what you're seeing from a number standpoint. And I think that if you don't have either one of those pieces, I hate the word optimized, but optimized, if you can't have conversations with your athletes, if your athletes don't know what they're feeling or how to articulate it or put it into words or what it means, then you have to address that. Likewise, from an objective side, if you don't know what you're testing or why you're testing it or how often to test it or the context of your testing, then there's no point to testing at that point, because you're just going to get fancy numbers for the sake of getting numbers and not actually be able to do anything with it. And on the periodization standpoint, like we talked about at length, it's about having that end goal in mind, determining how we get there, but also being able to master the micro within that and understand what we have to do from the day to day, week to week, and month to month in order to achieve that larger goal.
Exactly. 100% agree with you. We have to be, when it comes to periodization, we have to be very, very flexible. Obviously, setting our main goals, main targets for that given period. The more experience you have in your environment, the better I think you can understand what can be achieved through periodization. Let me back it up a little bit with one example. If for many years you work in basketball environment where you have one competition a week, you normally have game in your country on Saturday or Sunday, then your periodization can be, let's say, more stable, because there is less games, there is less traveling involved, and you can maybe shift if you are someone who likes traditional type of periodization. Okay, obviously, when you have basketball involved with strength and power training, there is always concurrent type of periodization. We cannot say, okay, now it's October, it's middle of the in-season, but we will not play basketball because we want to do a block of hypertrophy. It's not possible. But at least maybe because of less factors like games and traveling, maybe you can devote a whole month for one quality. Is it hypertrophy? Is it strength? Is it power? Okay, so maybe you can go more into linear periodization. Maybe you can go more into block periodization. Maybe for the whole in season, you are a true believer that you should focus on conjugate type of periodization. So whatever you decide, I think makes a lot of sense if you know what your environment is. And when it comes to elite level basketball, where I said like elite for me starts at least two competitions in the NBA. It's one competition, but there are so many games, 82 games regular season plus postseason. In European basketball, it means that you will play domestic championship, let's say in Spain, Germany, Greece, you name it, plus European. And there are 4 European competitions. The elite one is EuroLeague. And it means that you will have at least 1 or 2 more EuroLeague games per week. So you end up playing 2 to 3 games a week. Now, when you know that environment, your periodization is maybe completely different from what your colleague does in the settings where they play one, but both could be very good, because they know the environment. And maybe this guy who plays one competition a week can periodize 2 to 3 months ahead and make small adjustments because their environment is just not so chaotic. On the other side, what happens with a team that plays 2 to 3 competitions, 2 to 3 games a week, maybe they can plan 1 month in advance, and very often, because of the fluctuation in players' readiness, they have to adjust and change, maybe change main targets, change main goals, not with everyone, but maybe with high loaders, maybe with unexpected high loaders that normally play low minutes, and you plan for another month and a half a heavy strength training, but for some reason, because of other player got injured and this guy started to play more minutes, he needs to completely change his type of program and his periodization. So the best case scenario would be that you have periodization model for every athlete on your team, or at least to put them in certain buckets. Now, what are going to be your approaches? Is it going to be based on minutes they play? Is it going to be based on the age? Younger, older players? There are so many starting points, and there is basically no wrong way. If you as a coach decide, I have 3 types of groups: high loaders, low loaders, moderate loaders. I have 2 groups, veterans and younger players. Whatever you do, it's a good decision if you ask me. But the more you know the environment and the more you try to understand players individually when you work on the team, I think you can be more successful, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, it makes perfect sense. And I think that you broke that down so well, Luka. And as you mentioned, you are definitely very passionate about this, and we could probably chat all day about this. For people who want to find out more about you, or maybe they're interested in checking out your books that way, where can they find you at online?
Yeah, the best and the easiest way is through Instagram, normally by my name. So nickname is silk_man, but my name is there, so they can easily reach out through Instagram. And then if someone wants just information about the books, they can email me at luka_svilar@yahoo.com. But they can also ask about the books through Instagram. So those are 2 easiest and fastest ways to reach out.
Where does that nickname come from, Luka? Where does Silkman come from?
It was a little joke. My surname, if you kind of cut it down, it's a man who makes silk. So it was just like Silk Man. I was young and just I'm not gonna say stupid, but it was just a joke when Instagram appeared, and I never thought like it's gonna be something like important. But obviously, because of the connection with a lot of colleagues, I really like Instagram because 80-90% of the time that I spend on Instagram, I would say even more than 90% of the time, is just related to chatting with my colleagues, posting or looking at some or being informed about something related to training. And it's super easy way to be in touch and understand where people are. I normally follow my fellow coaches. So when I travel around, it's easy to reach out. You can see if someone is coming close to your city, and then you can just reach out and say, yeah, I'm here, let's meet for a coffee, whatnot. So I use Instagram mainly to be in touch with my colleagues. So yeah, I didn't want to delete the nickname because it's not stupid. It was just a joke, and then it became a thing. But yeah, the only thing that I don't like is when people see me and then they don't know me by my name so much, and then they say, "Hey, what's up, Silkman?" I'm like, "Come on, man, come on, just call me Luka." But yeah,
I guess we could call you Doctor too, right?
Oh no, that part is like the worst. I like maybe a couple of months ago when I was in Romania giving a lecture, and then the guy gave like a little intro to my lecture, and he said, we have a privilege to have Dr. Luka Svilar with us. And I'm like, come on, like why is it so important to say, like, I did it for myself, and I still cannot believe that I have PhD diploma, but definitely there is no need to call me a doctor. Just whoever can call me by my name, that's perfect. I don't mind the nicknames. I don't mind. Just social media nickname is just stupid. I always say, like, nicknames you cannot choose. So if someone comes up with a new nickname, like, I don't know, if I go to the States and someone calls me bald head, I will accept it. Like, if players come out on the team and they make a nickname for me, I don't know, whatever it is, I will accept it, but just not Silkman. It's it's like, I don't know, I don't like it.
No, I got you, Luka. Well, I really appreciate your time and everything that you're doing that way. And I love your passion for this space. And I think that you just bring a great personality and great wealth of experience to it. We'll link to all of your social handles and all that sort of thing in the description below. That way, if you want to reach out to Luka and find out more about his books or all the amazing things that he's doing, you can just click there. Luka, I really appreciate your time.
Thank you, my man. Thank you.